Good Monday morning. Mark Honlock, Director of Horticulture here at Green Bay Botanical Garden on a sweltering day. The sun is like baking down on me. It's going to be 90 degrees out here, so it's crazy. Wanted to share with you some tips about pollinator gardening. It's kind of a big thing, and it's actually National Pollinator Week, I believe June 1st through 27th, so coming up a little bit. So I want to give you some tips about gardening for pollinators, things probably I've talked about before, but I'll kind of bring them all together, hopefully. And one of the first things most people think about when they think about pollinators, they think about bees, of course, but they also think about monarch butterflies. There is, a decline of the monarchs quite a bit. So one thing to think about for like pollinators, and especially for the caterpillars, is you need to have the right food for them to eat. So you need the host plant for the caterpillar to get the butterfly. And we talked about a lot about that with our butterfly exhibit in the last couple of years. But we do have this garden behind there that you can get some ideas from. So we have the common milkweed here that we have planted, and you can see they're kind of spread out here. So we have the host plant for the monarch. And we'll look at another one over there too, though, for you. But the other thing to think about when you're gardening for pollinators is to think about flowers that are in the springtime, the summertime, and the fall. And also to plant them in big blocks and masses so there's enough of that nectar source when these guys are in bloom for that to make it worth their while to come and check out. And that's for bees and other things too. So here we have fireworks goldenrod, which is a late summer fall bloomer. So we have our fall interest. Over here we have this salvia that's in bloom right now. It's not a native plant, but it's something that is in bloom. And in our grand garden we have a penstemon that's in bloom right now. So that's a native that's in bloom for all these pollinators to be getting nectar and food from. And the other thing I wanted to tell you is, if you come up here, you'll see on this Joe Pye weed, we have all these holes in here. So we know that there's some kind of caterpillar eating on here, which we think is a good thing, right? So when we're gardening for pollinators, we have to learn to live with this damage. Like as gardeners, a lot of times we're like, oh my God, what is eating this thing? We need to kill that thing so that we don't have this hole in our foliage. But I found this little caterpillar somewhere on here. If Rachel pans around, hopefully we can find it. Where'd it go?
He scampered away.
He scampered away.
It's too hot.
Yeah, he's a little green guy, and I don't know exactly what kind of butterfly it is, but in essence, the thing is you got to do the 12-step program where you step 12 steps away and you're like, I don't see any holes anymore, and learn to love that damage because you know that you're actually creating habitat. So that's kind of like the mental part of overcoming that as a gardener that always wants to control the insects. The other thing to think about for host plants is a lot of caterpillars actually use trees. So the oak tree supports a huge amount of caterpillars, like over 500 different species of them. Black cherry is another good one for our area, and if Rachel kind of pans around, there's a willow here too, and willows are another one. So that National Wildlife Federation Plant Finder is a great website. Dr. Doug Tallamy helped set that up. He's a guy that investigates all this stuff from the University of Delaware. And you can go to that plant finder and type in your zip code, and it'll give you a list of trees and shrubs and perennials that support the most caterpillars and therefore butterflies. And remember, the birds preferentially feed caterpillars to their young, and they need all that protein and energy to successfully raise their clutches of birds. So if you don't have all those habitat trees and plants, but mostly it's the trees, you won't be able to have enough food for the birds to reproduce either. So it's like all tied together in the whole food chain and ecosystem. The other random thought I wanted to pass on to you, you might remember from one of my other Mondays with Mark, is like we really like to clean up stuff here, maybe too much. So we're really rethinking all that, because in Doug's latest book, he was saying how most caterpillars, like 90% of them that are on the oak trees, actually pupate on leaves on the ground or in the ground. So we always think of the monarch making its little chrysalis on the milkweed, but the majority of these guys actually do that in the leaf litter and underground. So we have to be careful not to like over clean up our gardens if we want to have that habitat. So maybe we clean it up too much for our own psychological well-being, but we're actually kind of like damaging the ecosystem a little bit by getting rid of all of those insects that are pupating down there. The other thing I was going to say is, hey, remember, it's not just about the pollinators. There's all kinds of other cool insects that you can watch flying around here. If Rachel kind of pans down, there's all these little kind of like sweat bees or other insects flying around this salvia. So we might have planted it initially for the butterflies and for the bees, but other insects are enjoying it too. And the rattlesnake master here is a really cool plant. And through our research, we found that like 85 different insects use it for food. So when you have all these native plants, you're helping all things, not just the pollinators. And even if you have a shade garden, you can see some of these guys like the bee balm will be able to, it's a big mass again that'll bloom in the summer for our food of our nectar source and our pollen source. But we can push into the shade with some other different white snakeroot and things like that that are native plants that we can still have for pollinators. So just because you have shade doesn't mean you can't have a pollinator garden, though in general, the sun is the place for those pollinators because there's more flower power. And one last thing I want to share with you, because I've been talking a long time here, but this Mount Cuba Center has done some really interesting research, and there's a kind of a controversy always between native plants, non-native plants, and these nativars, which are selections of native plants. So they've been doing studies, and the interesting thing about their study on phlox was that Jenna garden phlox, this cultivar, actually produced like more smaller flowers and had more butterfly visits than all of the other different phloxes. So there's reason to believe that that one actually might be, maybe a better pollinator plant. They also have to do research on the value and the food value of the nectar and the pollen and stuff. But it just goes to show you that there's more than we know about all these things. But in general, if you go with the native plants, that's the best thing to do. There are some other pollinator plants we put in here because we've noticed pollinators on other things. So just remember that Doug's study was that about 70% of the biomass in your yard should be native plants. But that still gives you 30% of your biomass to be the ornamentals that you know and love. And you can still have a great garden for pollinators and all other animals and help provide habitat and support our planet. So for more information, check out our website, gbbg.org, or check out our Facebook.